button, and it's doing its little whirly. And does your guys' screen say live in the corner?
Let me check. Yes, mine does. Paul, it's that little red thing in the corner. Do you see it?
Yeah, I see it.
Okay.
Okay. And so I'm just going to figure out what day this is that we're going to be sharing this, and then I'll tell everybody what day it is as soon as my calendar open my calendar. Okay, so this is the 29th today. And when I get my arrow, okay, so let's see. This is going to be our second show next month, Paul. So we're going to be releasing it around the 20th.
Mhm.
So it's actually kind of around St. Patrick's Day, not that it matters. So, okay, so I am going to go ahead and start the house lights. Let's see. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the beautiful, historical Marionette Theater. Won't you join us for a show about film and television trivia? Take your seats. The show is about to begin. My little thingy here. Tonight, we're going to be discussing a film from the early 70s that involves a little tale of the recording industry and an artist done wrong who has to go into hiding. We're going to have a damsel in distress, some undiscovered talent, and a shadowy figure in the wings. Take your seats. The show is about to begin. And here we are with Gertie and
Hey, Paul, I just love the way you keep your beard. Does it take a lot of work?
Well, I do spend a lot of time at it, but I think it's worth it.
I just love your accent. It's so dreamy.
Thank you, thank you.
It's so nice having you here at the Marionette Theater, Paul.
Good to be here. It's great. Looks great.
Yeah, I do a lot of the upkeep around here.
Oh, you do a very good job.
Now, anytime you want something from the concession stand, just give your little hand a wave and I'll see you and I'll just bring you whatever you want, okay?
Thank you, Gertie. That's so kind of you.
All right, Gertie, we need to do the opening. Oh, of course. All right. DJ, cue my music, okay, honey? Shrinking Violet Winslow Leach is driven mad when the heart and soul of his life's passion is stolen by record tycoon Swan. Framed for a crime he didn't commit, he must escape his prison so the public will learn the truth about the talent behind the opening of the town's hottest new club. Will Winslow's name be cleared? Will the songbird he's smitten for fall for the swan's evil advances? Slip on a pair of bell bottoms and get your high platform dancing shoes. It's time for Phantom of the Paradise. Hit it, boys.
What do you get when you take a dash of the silver screen, a pinch of golden oldies, and a smidgen of screaming? It's time for Matinee Minutia with your hosts DJ and Toppy.
well, hey there, folks, and welcome to the beautiful historical Marionette Theater. Grab yourself a cup of tea because we're going to sit down and have a chat with our friend from across the pond, Mr. Paul Chandler of the Shy Life podcast. Welcome, Paul.
Hi, DJ. It's great to be here.
And of course, to my side, we have my co-host, my partner in crime, Mr. Toppy Smelly.
Yes, indeed. Howdy do, everybody.
So, Toppy, it's going to be St. Patrick's Day shortly here. Actually, it will have already been. And are you one who enjoys those mint green shakes that they have in the drive-thrus?
Well, not exactly. Let's see. What do I like? A nice green top hat, felt. I don't care if I have a green beer or something like that. Green lipstick. Sometimes I'll wear that. Paul, is St. Patrick's Day a big deal over there where you are?
To a certain extent, although I think it's quite easy to avoid as well. If you want to go to the pubs, there's always something going on. But I don't think I've ever had a green beer. It's intriguing.
Yeah. DJ, as far as our selection tonight, the color scheme of Phantom of the Paradise isn't exactly green. It's kind of red, isn't it?
It is, and it takes place in the 70s. So, of course, there's plenty of denim, there's gold, and rose-colored glasses.
Mm-hmm.
And
well, why don't you set the scene for us? Phantom of the Paradise came out in 1974. Actually, let's play that trailer.
Okay.
Yeah. Phantom.
20th Century Fox presents Phantom of the Paradise, a gothic horror story.
What was that?
Our love. A beautiful love story.
Oh, love, baby. Like a circus.
A cinematic odyssey through the rock universe. From Greece to glitter.
Wow!
And beyond. The story of a sound, the man who created it, the girl who sang it, the monster who stole it, and the phantom who haunts the paradise, the ultimate rock palace. Phantom of the Paradise.
My music is from Phoenix. Only she can sing it. Anyone else that tries dies.
Phoenix.
Well, you told me one time that you'd be somebody, that you weren't working just to survive.
B.
Whoa, whoa, wow!
Man, you better get yourself a castrato for this.
Paul Williams as Swan.
And the angels that defeated them.
I want you to stop terrorizing the paradise and rewrite your cantata.
And the Phantom.
Stop and try me up. Only you might satisfy me
Phantom of the Paradise.
Ew.
Phantom.
Ooh. DJ 1974. Set the stage for us. What was going on in this crazy world?
Okay. In 1974, daylight savings time began 4 months early in response to the energy crisis, which was also the oil embargo in the Middle East. And U.S. District Court Judge George Bolt ruled that the Native American tribes in Washington states are entitled to half of the legal salmon based on treaties signed by the tribes and the U.S. government. Also in 74, Stephen King's first novel, Carrie, is published. And the Universal Product Code, otherwise known as UPC, the barcode, it's scanned for the first time in stores.
Oh, God, I never would have known it was that early.
And we certainly didn't get it out in the haystack until later than that.
Yeah.
I remember up until the 90s, we still had the little sticker stamps. And, well, I remember my brother swapping things out when we went grocery shopping. But it was to sell a package of Wrigley's chewing gum at the Marsh Supermarket in Troy, Ohio.
Oh, you mean that's the product they first scanned?
It is. It got out in the heartland there. And winding things out in 74, the year of this film, Richard Nixon, he becomes the first president of the United States to resign from office.
Yes,
Well,
indeed.
hoping he's not the last, but okay.
Well, yeah. Paul, that was an incredibly American US of A centric wind up of what was going on in 74. Is there anything that you recall in the UK that was happening in 1974?
Well, 1974 was the year that ABBA won the Eurovision Song Contest, and with their song Waterloo.
Ooh,
that was the start of them being sort of really big. So that's the thing that I think of. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, in 74, we had some celebrity births and deaths. We'll start with Seth Green. He's an actor and voice actor known for Family Guy. And we've got Jerry O'Connell, known as Quinn on Fox's Sliders. He's also the voice of Clark Kent and Superman on Justice League. How about Grace Park, born that year? She's Boomer on Sci-Fi Channel's Battlestar Galactica. Allison Hannigan, and she was in My Stepmother is an Alien and How I Met Your Mother. And of course, Leonardo DiCaprio. Well, I suppose most well known for Titanic, and he was Oscar nominated for The Wolf of Wall Street in 2013, and DJ, in the theaters in 1974. What else was competing with our beloved Phantom of the Paradise?
Okay, so the other films that were out in 74 competing for your attention. Number one was a comedy film. It was a Western of sorts. It was Blazing Saddles with Cleavon Little and Gene Wilder, and that brought in $119 million that year.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, this next one is a good one because it's our old pal Irwin Allen.
Yeah, I think this might be a favorite of yours. This film was number two, and it starred Steve McQueen and Paul Newman, and this brought $116 million in. Talking about Towering Inferno.
Hey, you guys, Towering Inferno was the first non-Disney movie I was ever allowed to go see. And let me tell you, when that lady fell out of the elevator to her death, I was not prepared for that. That did not happen in Disney movies.
And rounding it out, and it should be so, of course, no surprise that we support the underdog here at Matinee Minutia. Well, Phantom of the Paradise, it wasn't even in the top 5. It wasn't even the top 3. Top 3, number 3, was a little film with a bit of martial arts and a little bit of the West. It was The Trial of Billy Jack, and it starred Tom Laughlin and then later wife Dolores Taylor. That brought in $89 million, and it was part of what was later a trilogy or a quadrilogy, Toppy?
More than 3. I was very shocked to find out. More than 3. And as a matter of fact, the last movie in the series was made in 1977, which really shocked me.
So Phantom of the Paradise, it didn't place in the top, but that's okay. It has a cult following, and we're here to talk about that today. Runner up to Phantom was a film called The Conversation, and this is a film that has Gene Hackman and John Cazale, and it brought in $4.4 million in 1974.
The Conversation, a well-respected movie today, even though it, didn't light the box office on fire. Today, it's known as, well, it's a good movie. Oh my goodness. DJ, what is it? Just us, or what happens? Why do we always get the underdog? We always choose the underdog. Why is that?
I think that the films that score big at the box office, they get too much attention. And I don't know about you, Toppy, but when I was growing up, I kind of considered myself the class clown because, maybe I needed a little bit more attention. So that's why I've got a sweet spot in my heart for films like this.
Yeah. Well, you know what? If we wanted to, DJ, we could be off the hook because it really wasn't us that chose this as a topic. And Paul Chandler of the Shy Life podcast, why?
Hello.
Why did you choose, of all the movies you could have chosen, you chose Phantom of the Paradise? Why?
Well, it's partly, as you said, it's a bit of an obscure choice. I think it's just stuck in my head. A friend of mine, fellow podcaster Nick Goodman, he was the one who showed it to me because he's a sort of big fan of 70s films, and I think he probably showed it to me at least 20 years ago. So I think it was probably even less talked about then than it is sort of now. A bit like films like The Wicker Man, which have had a growing sort of cult following over the last 20, 25 years. Phantom of the Paradise is similar.
It's certainly well into what we call a cult film today. That's for sure.
Yeah, you can get in like nice Blu-ray versions, and yeah, it's sort of.
And so, what year would you say you saw it first?
I would say 20, 25 years ago, possibly. And it's probably one of the first Brian De Palma films I saw.
Yeah, in a theater?
No, it would have been. I don't know. It was definitely VHS. Whether it was recorded off the television or whether it was
okay.
He bought it, I'm not sure. But,
all right, my history with this movie is a number of my pals and I, back in 1974, we were just kids, and we loved horror movies. And a friend of mine must have seen Phantom of the Paradise because he talked about it a lot. I had no idea, what it was. My parents had only just let me go see The Towering Inferno. They certainly weren't going to let me go see Phantom of the Paradise. And so for years, I mean, right up to today, all I'd done was heard and known about the movie. And I knew practically nothing about it. And frankly, I don't think in all my life I ever saw somebody play a clip from it. I didn't know what it looked like. I knew it was like Phantom of the Opera, but that's about it. And I knew that it was, I think I knew that it was kind of a horror comedy. I think I knew that. But sat down and watched it just the other day. And there's a lot to unpack here. DJ, when did you run across this movie, if ever?
Well, funny you should ask that. Of course, I am the junior of all three here, and you'll have to pardon the "Are you being served" reference, my dear friend there. But I was introduced on behalf of Paul here, so thank you. And I want to assume that because Paul still associates with his friend Nick that introduced him to this, we're still on good terms, and we'll see if Toppy forgives me for some of the films that I've introduced him to. But but I have enjoyed this, and I of course I wasn't aware of this when it came out. I wasn't quite a twinkle in anyone's eye, but I am fascinated to learn some of the things that I have about this, which we'll get into shortly. But what some may not realize was that this was in the works already before Rocky Horror made it to the screen.
And it was even released before Rocky Horror, right?
Yeah.
A year before.
About a year, yeah.
Yeah. There's so much to unpack here. And Paul, you are very knowledgeable about the music scene. You've spent time, reviewing music past and present, and I'm hoping you can fill us in. When I think of what I just saw on Phantom of the Paradise, and then a year later in Rocky Horror Picture Show, there's two things uh, that I immediately become aware of. Each movie had a version of some sort of creature being made, a Frankenstein monster being unveiled, and kind of a rock opera kind of way. And all I'm thinking, I want to know what was going on in perhaps New York City or London or Chicago, where this was a gestalt, this kind of rock opera. And I don't know, it can't be just a coincidence that these two movies had this Frankenstein motif. But sort of a stage spectacle, where people are half naked and it's just a little psychedelic. Was there something going on?
Well, by '74, the sort of the glam era in the UK, which is people like David Bowie and T-Rex, sort of became famous. But I don't think a lot of the glam side was happening. But by '74, David Bowie probably would have been known, I think, all over the world. So there was sort of that going, and I think also by '74, Kiss had started or were beginning to become famous. So, and Kiss are sort of inspired a bit by the UK glam scene, with all the sort of glitter and face paint, and so there's that. In fact, they did mention. I think there's a song in the film where there's a band who keep recurring in trying different music, and there is one song where they're all dressed in sort of face paint, and the one of the documentaries I heard, they did sort of mention, did they influence Kiss or did Kiss influence them? Nobody was prepared to say. So,
can I just say that the feeling I have behind it all is avant-garde, underground stuff that was not mainstream at all. Wherever this originated, this was stuff that I think we can call underground, not just nothing. It was subversive. It was. Go ahead.
I suppose in the early '70s, also sort of leading up to this, you'd had a lot of those big sort of pop musicals like Hair and Jesus Christ Superstar, and although not horror, they were very that sort of taking pop and you see that could be an extent of Phantom, and Rocky Horror could be an extension of those sorts of things.
Was Tommy the Rock Opera after this or before or contemporaneous?
I think around the same sort of time. It may be slightly earlier. I'd have to double check, but but there's a lot of that sort of thing going on.
My feelings about this era in music are that here in the States we have what we call the British invasion, of course. So this is in the decade that followed that, and I just feel as though maybe the children of the Beatles had raided their mother's wardrobe, got into her makeup, and we just decided to invent glam rock.
Yeah. Oh, I can confirm. Tommy came out in '75. The musical, the film musical. This was that Tommy was more sort of around the same time as Rocky Horror. So Phantom was slightly ahead.
Mm-hmm. Anyways, I would love to have been in New York City to see what was going on that was bubbling beneath the surface that maybe inspired someone like Brian De Palma, who directed this movie, to envision something like this. And also a whole different crowd almost simultaneously developing some sort of vision for Rocky Horror. They're just, God only knows what it was like. It must have been fascinating.
It makes you wonder if Brian De Palma hung out at Studio 54.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Looking at his sort of filmography, there was a bit of a gap between the previous film Sisters in 1972, which I've also seen. That's quite a weird film. Again, completely different from Phantom. That's got Margot Kidder in it. But that and again, that is a sort of slasher, an early sort of form of slasher film. It's quite a complicated story. So very different. The two films. He's obviously trying to do something completely different this time.
Now, the story of Phantom of the Paradise is a mashup, sort of 3 or 4 different stories, and most certainly, Phantom of the Opera is in this, and we've got the composer Winslow Leach, who has done his life's work, and he's put it down on paper. And in the beginning of the film, he's discovered, we have a moment where, after this performance is done in the studio, he comes in and he gets down on the piano, and then the big wig, Mr. Swan's henchman there, Philbin, hears him, and then of course goes to talk to him in the dressing room. But that's his life's work, and it's something called a cantata. Now, Toppy, for our listeners' benefit, could you tell us what the definition of a cantata is?
Yeah, and trust me, I didn't know this. I had to look it up. But a cantata is a medium-length narrative piece of music for voices plus instrumental accompaniment. There's solos. There's usually a chorus. There's usually a full orchestra. We're talking... we could use the word epic. This sounds like it's some kind of narrative that is epic.
Yeah, because the way Winslow was attached to his music in the beginning there, he's holding on to it like it's his child, and it's all bound with, I think, rubber bands to hold it together. Now, certainly he's using that term cantata affectionately, but I think he said that it was over 200 pages, so he's using sort of artistic license to call that a cantata, something that big.
Right. And this guy's portrayed by, this is Finley, right? William Finley?
Yeah, and William Finley has done a bunch of work, including Phantom of the Paradise. Now, a lot of his roles were sort of character parts, and Mr. Finley's no longer with us. He passed away, I do believe, in the teens, as we say now that we're in the 2020s. His last credited role was in 2006, The Black Dahlia. Now, ironically, I did see that in the theaters, and it was a kind of a dark and creepy movie, but there was a murder involved. It had Josh Hartnett and Scarlett Johansson, and William Finley played the creepy boyfriend of the murderer in that film.
Mm-hmm. I do know that the main reason William Finley wound up is in this role is he was buddies with De Palma. They were college buddies.
Yeah, and the Black Dahlia, that's also a Brian De Palma film. So he's still got that connection 20 plus years later as well.
Right. Let's get to the score, to the music, and we're talking that was primarily responsible for Paul Williams, and I can kind of see why De Palma arrived at Paul Williams, because the year before Paul Williams was nominated for an Oscar for something that he had done. It was called Nice to Be Around. That was the name of the piece of music, and it was co-written with none other than John Williams, and it was from a movie in 1973 called Cinderella Liberty. So Paul Williams was already getting a reputation around town as a movie guy, a soundtrack guy, and I can see why De Palma might have thought of him. And also, don't you guys think that, another reason De Palma might have thought of him is he was known for appearing in movies, but he looked weird. Paul Williams is a bit of a strange-looking man, and it fit perfectly with this character called the Swan.
Yeah, I did wonder because I've already seen pictures of him around this time, and I presume they're for this film, but I don't know how much that was his. I have a feeling that's probably kind of what he used to, what he dressed like anyway. So he didn't sort of change his appearance that much for the film. I might be wrong, but
Yeah, I don't know either. But he was kind of short. He had long hair, an unusual face.
It was fun to see how they incorporated his stature into the persona of Mr. Swan, and that he was, a corporate type. He was the megalomaniac who was in charge, and all of the doorways in the important places were lowered to remind you that this is his venue.
Yeah. Let's just stretch out Paul's, rather extensive career, but he went on to do work with Barbara Streisand as the music supervisor for Stars Born, 76. The Muppet Movie in 79, famous certainly for the Rainbow Connection in the Muppet Movie, which won that soundtrack won 2 Grammy Awards. And he went on to do lots of things. Bugsy Malone, Ishtar, The Sum of All Fears. And as an actor, perhaps most strangely, he was in one of the Planet of the Apes movies, behind the costume. He was the orangutan Virgil, who I believe was the keeper of the weapons. And that was in Battle for the Planet of the Apes in 1973. So what a weird career.
There was an anecdote he said on something I listened to, where there's a scene at the end of the film where he's kind of wearing a mask, a sort of silvery mask, and apparently that was made from the mold that they used to make his mask for Planet of the Apes. But apparently he said that he'd actually lost quite a lot of weight, so he was quite pleased he'd lost a lot of weight, and then of course he had to wear the mask where he was made him look bigger again. So yeah.
Oh,
the anecdote.
What an awesome piece of trivia that is. I did not know that. That's pretty. That's a nice little nugget right there.
So Mr. Paul Williams is just one of a handful of the main stars in this cast, and another, of course, is the songbird who's discovered during this ordeal. The composer, Mr. I'm forgetting his name now, William Leach. He is, of course, disfigured through an accident after he's framed for a crime, and he falls for one of the singers who's trying out for the part of singing his cantata at the opening of the club. Now, that's played by Jessica Harper, and her character is Phoenix. Now, Phantom of the Paradise was her first film debut. And in the following year, in 75, she'd star with Richard Dreyfuss and Bob Hoskins in an odd film called Inserts, where it involved some adult film silent era. But interestingly enough, Jessica Harper also starred a handful of years later in the film that followed Phantom of the Paradise, Rocky Horror Picture Show's low budget, some might say, sequel, and it was called Shock Treatment. And so she actually replaced Susan Sarandon in the low budget sequel to Rocky Horror Picture, ironically.
Interesting.
She's in 2 of my favorite films other than this one.
Oh,
as well.
Name them.
She's in Suspiria, which is a Dario Argento film from 77, and she actually appeared in the remake from 2018 as a different character. But she's also in Stardust Memories from 1980. That's one of my favourite Woody Allens. She's also in Love and Death, another Woody Allen, but Stardust Memories, she has a bigger part, I think.
Yeah,
But,
and
so
interesting. Let's move on to the actor who portrays Beef, which we'll be talking about more. That's Garrett Graham. He's another buddy, really, of De Palma from college days. That's pretty much why he wound up in Phantom of the Paradise. But he went on to have fairly extensive career as an actor, a lot of TV stuff, Beretta, Starsky and Hutch, Laverne and Shirley, the A-Team fame. It goes on and on. Oh, all the way up to Star Trek Voyager. And the 1980s Twilight Zone. He was a voice in Disney's The Little Mermaid. And he, oddly enough, co-wrote the screenplay for a cartoon short called The Prince and the Pauper in 1990. So he's been around and done quite a lot. Actually, says here, he was also a writer involved in The Little Mermaid. So there you go. But also, he was in Chud too. So, quite a career.
I think Beef is one of my favourite characters, particularly that scene in when he's having a shower and the Phantom approaches him and sticks the plunger. And it's just his expression when he gets the plunger stuck over his face.
Right.
Yeah. I wasn't as familiar with Mr. Graham's work, but someone from my generation would recognize him more from what Toppy was saying. One of his later roles was in Star Trek Voyager. It was a guest role, but for the everyday sci-fi nerd, he'll go down in history as the only member of the Q continuum, those omnipotent beings who wanted to end his life.
Oh, that was the Voyager episode.
Yes.
Yeah. His role as Beef. Somebody describe this. Who is Beef in Phantom of the Paradise? Somebody unpack this.
Well, he's that pinnacle figure of the glam rock era, and in the unveiling of him at the concert at the Paradise, that's the premiere night, he is somewhat of a construct. He's assembled, aka like Frankenstein, from members of the audience that were basically planted there because they have dismembered parts that are severed by the I forget what it's called, the long part of the guitars. They're made to look like they have a sort of a knife type of weapon on them,
or a blade of some sort. Yeah.
And so the band is performing, and they're selecting victims from the audience, and then they're gathering the parts, and then they create this monster that comes down from the ceiling just like Frankenstein, and it is Beef in all of his glory. And again, this film is released before Rocky Horror, but it's that same splendor that Tim Curry would later follow in the shadow of.
Right. And Beef comes out, and he's kind of hot. He has a very gay sensibility. In fact, they pretty much do everything they can to insinuate that Beef in real life is a gay man. I'm trying to think, you guys. Did Brian De Palma really dislike gay people? Or what do you think? Or was it just the time, and they just did the most obvious things to say that this guy's gay? What do you guys what's your guys' take?
Yeah, I know what you mean. I'm not sure. I wasn't because they say the F word as well. The
Oh,
not yeah.
yeah.
Um,
Not a cigarette, but
yeah,
Yeah. Paul
Uh,
Williams says, "Get this F-A-G."
yeah. But that's the character. That's typical of that character. You can't imagine that character being that enlightened. So I don't know how much it is the characters rather than or whether it is anything from behind the scenes, just the way things were. But
Mhm.
I was wondering myself, and they don't really, because I've seen
It's hard to tell. It really is.
yeah.
There's
is
nothing. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
sorry, it's not clear whether that was intended as to be, prejudice against that type of person. But in a cast reunion that I got to watch, um, Garrett Graham was asked about the direction that he received playing the character, and he said that he was basically told to be flamboyant.
Okay. So I think maybe the stereotypes that we saw portrayed is just an indication of the year that this was made. And perhaps we shouldn't read into it that Brian De Palma had some kind of weird thing against gay people. He may have loved gay people. I don't know.
Well, it was interesting though too because Garrett Graham certainly played that character and gave you some surprises on screen. His character was strong for being possibly flamboyant or effeminate, and when his character was practicing for the premiere that night, he was told by Swan that only he could perform that song, that he could outdo basically any woman. And Swan was playing into the stereotype that possibly a gay man wouldn't want to be outdone by a woman.
Right. And I have to say that the actor, Garrett Graham, was fearless in his portrayal. Wouldn't you guys agree? I mean, I mean, that is an awesome performance, and he really gets up there. And it's interesting because we're watching on film a stage musical, and it's kind of filmed in real time so that you really get a feel like it's a stage musical. For example, when they go after to get these victims out of the audience, they don't explain anything, but it's as you watch it, you realize, oh, these are just stage dummies that they're cutting up. And it's very much like you are sitting in the audience watching this, and it's staged like it really is a musical, and De Palma just happens to be there filming it. I found that all very interesting. What did you guys think?
Yeah, that was really cool. I also kind of think find I kind of wonder because I find that Beef's it's like a parody of I don't know of somebody like maybe from like Led Zeppelin. He's really over the top, and almost to the point of I'm trying to work out whether they think he's good or whether they think he's bad or they don't care or it's part of the plot or because he's so over the top and he falls over and he's not he's not great, but they keep on and they let him play the role, and I'm sort of tying myself in knots thinking what was Swan thinking when they gave him that role.
There is something in the plot. Can we think of it? Why did he okay, so we'll make it clear that the Phantom of the Paradise wanted his woman, Jessica Harper. Anybody remember the name of her character?
Phoenix.
Phoenix.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, well, do you think there's any reason why her name was symbolically called Phoenix? Can we think of anything? Why? It can't be like we know what a phoenix is.
Yeah.
I think maybe it's to suggest that she's reinventing herself, and it's certainly it's not her real name, but as you follow her character through this film, she's showing up to all of these tryouts, and they keep telling her, we want you to do this, and she says, I'm not a screamer, I'm a singer. And she keeps getting turned away for having talent because all they want is a pretty face.
Yeah.
I think you got it there, DJ. Yeah, Phoenix. Phantom of the Paradise wants Phoenix, to be doing this bit on stage that Beef is doing. And by this time, Phantom of the Paradise is so unhinged that he murders Beef right on stage. And then as the story progresses, we're almost near the climax. Phoenix is chosen to be in the Swan's next big, huge deal. And by then, Swan has realized that the murder on stage of Beef was such a hit. I mean, the fans, that he decides, the next thing I do, I'm going to get rid of Phoenix on stage, and that'll even be a bigger hit. And that's how it leads up to the climax, because Phantom of the Paradise, who's really an anti-hero, he's a murderer. But at the end, he is rushing to save Phoenix from being killed on stage, and that's where all the climax comes from at the end.
Did anyone else feel, though, watching this, that title, Phantom of the Paradise, leads you to wonder if automatically the Phantom is actually the composer now that he's disfigured, or is it more in the sense that it's a phantom, that it's a shadow of someone, in which case Mr. Swan would fit that bill? Because, spoiler, Paul, could you fill the listeners in a little bit about Mr. Swan? What's his dark secret?
Well, this is where the Faust story, or the sort of selling your soul to the devil thing comes in, because he as much as the Phantom sells his soul to Swan has also sold his soul already. He's under contract too, as he says at one point.
Yeah, it's a little bit like, you'll have to forgive me because I'm not as involved with the lore of horror films, but is it vampires that you have to kill the one who bit you for you to kill the vampire?
I think what you mean is, if someone's bitten by a vampire, if you kill that vampire that did the biting, the person that was turned into a vampire in the movies most times is like miraculously cured.
Right. So in the same way that Paul has explained to the listeners that Mr. Swan 2 is under contract, the composer Phoenix, or the Phantom there, he's not going to be rid of him because somebody else is pulling the strings.
Right. That's kind of a big reveal, isn't it?
Yeah.
Paul Williams, basically also signed his soul over. In fact, there's a big battle sequence between the Phantom and the Swan, and it turns out both of them are immortal, pretty much. And they're both stabbing each other and not killing each other. Weird.
Yeah. So, Toppy, if it's all right with you, I'd like to ask a question here, because we're a good way through the show. But after watching this, I have to wonder, Paul. You've told us how you came to learn of this film, and how you come to know of it as one of your favorites. But since the 70s, when this was released there, how do you think that the recording industry has changed? Because certainly in the generations that follow, we had the likes of, like Prince and George Michael, who felt like they were indebted to their contracts that they had no way out, so they basically had to reinvent themselves.
Yeah, and it's not like they were just starting off, as they were at the top of their game, and they were still being manipulated by their management. You'd think that by the time they got that far, that they'd get to be the directors of their career, but that's not always the case. So actually, I'm not sure much has changed at all. I mean, the things that have changed, obviously, the way that music's distributed, and that often the new album by a band is not as important as the tour, the live event. But behind the scenes, I really wouldn't be surprised if there's very little difference. I don't think artists get much control. A lot of bands, particularly if they're boy bands or girl bands, it's the people who write their songs who are directing them.
Yeah, because I've heard that due to the streaming element, artists aren't selling entire albums anymore. So it depends how many times a song is listened to. And for goodness sakes, now we've got soundtracks to movies. And so some songs that have been out for a long time now are getting rediscovered by new generations because, like Phantom of the Paradise, it's become a cult classic.
Yeah. I really don't think that it probably is that much different. I hope nobody's selling their soul, but
well, we've got people who will put wigs on backwards and don't show their faces, and that's certainly understandable. I mean, Swan himself didn't want his picture taken, and of course, once you get more than halfway through the movie, you understand why.
Yeah. I think Lady Gaga would have fitted in very well if she'd have been around. She could have been the phoenix of the movie if she'd have been there in that time.
Mm-hmm. We really need to address Brian De Palma. He directed this and he also wrote it. This is a De Palma movie, and the most obvious question I have is what was his deal? What I mean is, this is a cynical movie. It's very cynical. Now, my guess is, since he really wasn't in the music biz, he was in the film biz, that we can take from it, I guess, maybe the cynicism that's the commentary of this movie about the music industry. I think maybe his experience was he has cynicism for the movie industry. That's my first observation. Does anybody have anything about that? I mean, it don't present the music industry in a very flattering light.
No, I mean, my thoughts on Brian De Palma, I don't know, because his career is kind of, it's almost like looking at it in front of me now. It's almost like two sort of separate halves, because I'm much more familiar with his 70s and early 80s stuff because it falls into that horror genre. More not every film, but you've got Carrie, you've got The Fury, you've got Dressed to Kill, and then you've got the like thriller like Blowout or Body Double. But the sort of things like Scarface and Untouchables and a lot of those ones I've never really watched because they go into the genre I'm not quite so interested in. And I don't know whether that means that he was making the films that he got to the stage where he could make the films he really wanted to make, or whether, maybe his interest changed. Maybe he always made the films he really wanted to make.
I wish I knew. I really wish I knew what was going on in his head that he wrote this movie, and it's dark. Yeah. It's dark.
Because it would have been a bit different, an American director compared to, I know quite a bit about Italian directors, and they were very much, so somebody does The Exorcist, right, we're going to do Italian imitations of, right, we're going to do this type of horror film because that's the thing that's it. But that's not the case with American directors. They were the ones leading the way, that other people were copying. So
yeah, one thing we know absolutely about De Palma is he was a student of film. He was fascinated by film and the way film can be used. He was fascinated by directors, and maybe even obsessed, possibly. And one of the things he was not afraid to do in his movies was to be very derivative. In The Untouchables, the scene with the baby carriage go down the stairs is right out of The Potemkin, a silent movie from Russia. In Phantom of the Paradise, he virtually says, I love Hitchcock. I'm doing a shower scene.
Yeah,
And instead of a knife, it's a plunger that he puts into the guy's face.
Yeah, I think he is kind of known a bit for his love of Hitchcock.
Yeah,
and he has that split screen thing he does in a lot of his films.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah, that's there in Phantom of the Paradise.
Does anybody know if this is the first movie he uses the split screen thing?
I haven't seen Sisters recently enough, which is the one before it. But
I think his most famous use of it is in Carrie, which wasn't done all that long after this movie. No. But one of the fascinating things he does is, he is filming what essentially is a live stage play. It's actually rehearsal, but he's got two cameras operating, filming simultaneously, and he does a split screen to show what's happening in the background and what's happening in the foreground. And all of that is from A Touch of Evil, an Orson Welles movie, the famous opening scene where Orson Welles does not break the camera as it moves along. It's a very famous scene. And apparently, again, De Palma is saying, I guess he's paying tribute. That's all I can say, think of. And maybe he wants in other words, these are not subtle tributes, that they're really obvious. Like, he's not hiding the fact that, what I'm really doing here is Orson Welles. What I'm really doing here is Hitchcock, et cetera. And I don't know, that kind of, I don't know. It's less obvious when you start getting into Scarface. It's not so obvious, but.
Well, and they say that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. So certainly, as De Palma, continued making films, he developed his own style. But these earlier films certainly were probably tributes to some of his favorites. But a moment ago, you mentioned something that I wanted to tie into some trivia here, Toppy. De Palma worked on Carrie, but little do some of our listeners know that a member of the cast of Carrie did some work on Phantom of the Paradise. Sissy Spacek helped dress the set.
Oh my God, I read that. How weird.
She was seeing her future husband while working on this, and she admitted she didn't do a very good job, but there you go, a piece of trivia. She was in Carrie by De Palma, and she worked on this. So,
well, I don't know why she thinks she didn't do a good job. One of the most memorable things about this damn movie are the sets.
Go
ahead.
Another Hitchcock connection to his films that he was still doing as late as '84 was his Body Double is very much Rear Window, or inspired by Rear Window. So he's still doing, his homage to Hitchcock, even after Scarface. Yeah.
Dressed to Kill has a lot of Hitchcock in it. Just briefly, he's doing way more than Hitchcock in the exposition of this movie. Think of how he moves the plot along so fast. When the musician is thrown out by the swan and he gets beat up and then sent to Sing Sing. That all happens in minutes. And there's a lot of cliche contrivances that he uses that are all the way back from silent film era. where he accomplishes these things, even from putting in, if you notice the music in some of those action sequences that are just a teensy bit sped up, are like the music that would have been played for a silent movie, Keystone Cops movie. So there's a lot of references to that. All those scenes where there's these montages of spinning newspapers that come up, and that's all like jeepers, so derivative. Even when the Phantom is writing his opus for the Swan, and he's locked in that room, oh, here we start the scene with this giant candle, and then when he's finished, we see the candle burnt down, and it's like it's it's so obvious, but I always wonder, like, why did he choose to do that?
Well, so before we wrap up, I just wanted to take a moment for each of us to pick what I like to call a moment you shouldn't miss. So we'll let our guests go first here. Paul, I think we've got a feline guest there. Is that Dealey?
Yeah, I'm hoping he'll come and join us, but we'll see.
He's thinking he'll take this opportunity to send a secret message to the cat mothership. So Paul, let us know, or let our listeners know rather, is there a moment in Phantom of the Paradise that really just glued you, that got you hooked, that maybe if they are thinking about watching it will get them to turn it on?
Sorry, I'm being climbed on. I just find the whole, when he starts to when he's sort of when the Phantom is still, he's been injured, but he sort of hasn't yet got his costume, but he sneaks into the theater, and you see it from his point of view, and he's waiting up the stairs, and people are coming and going, and then he goes in. It's a bit like Doctor Who, when the Doctor chooses his new costume. He has a wardrobe to pick from, and he sort of, although that mask is just sitting there for him, he's well served. But
Okay. The scene where he's prowling around the theater in its point of view shots. Okay. Did anyone else just go right to Halloween and the point of view shots that even go right to the mask in the first Halloween? It all starts with someone prowling around a house who eventually goes inside. They go upstairs. It's all point of view, and then he has this mask, and we see it in his hand, and he puts it over his face. That's right out of Phantom of the Paradise.
Yeah,
it just can't be a coincidence. I think that's like another director saying, De Palma was the shit. I'm inspired by this. I just have to believe that's the case. I don't know.
So would that be what you think will get folks hooked? Are those scenes there?
Not particularly. I think the scenes that I think will get people hooked are the couple of scenes where De Palma is essentially filming something that's happening live on stage. There's and you seem to be watching a full blown real musical on stage, and I think those are the parts that are like, wow, this is something.
It's got so much to do in it. It's almost like a Super Bowl halftime show.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that what drew me in were the character moments. Like when Winslow is sitting down to play the piano, you realize that they're revealing part of who he is. He's attached to the piano, and he's just a ordinary man who's trying to tell his story. And then you see those moments of transformation, like when he's injured after he breaks out of jail and now he's going on a rampage. Well, I also feel that that moment where Swan has worked his magic, and by that I mean he's talked him into trusting him again, and he's going to make his music the star of his label. So they've locked him up in that little booth, and it's sort of a cage, if you will. You know, there's
It
no,
is, yeah.
yeah. And he, of course, he's complete with a bird-like mask, so it's very fitting. But it's part of the trivia is that he's got them all hooked up, and they're altering his voice because, of course, he's injured himself as part of his rampage. So he's got what passes for a voice box sitting on his chest. I mean, nowadays it looks like a big CB radio hanging by a strap, but it doesn't sound very much unlike the voice modulator that they used for the Daleks on Doctor Who.
Yeah.
And when Paul Williams' character is playing around with the soundboards, doing the knobs and buttons and everything, his voice ends up being, spoiler, Paul Williams' own singing voice. So of course now it's perfect, and that's just a example of what kind of an egomaniac this Mr. Swan is. He turns his artists into a shadow of himself.
Do you guys I don't know the answer to this. I'm just wondering. In prison, we see the Phantom. It's just so comical and weird and slapstick. Apparently, one of the things they do in this prison is they rip out your teeth and put in metal teeth. Do you have? Did that mean something? Is it did you feel like that was symbolic of anything? I couldn't. It was such a point. Was it just so that we could see the Phantom running around looking weird with metal teeth, or was there something more symbolic?
I'm not sure.
I don't know.
I think it had two purposes. Of course, it allowed the Phantom character to be that much more horrific, but also he already had him in jail, and in a sense, just like a lot of those mobster movies, you've got someone on the outside that I think that was his Swan's way of saying, you may be in jail, but I've still got you under my thumb.
Right. Let's finally talk about I think it's worth mentioning. I saw a print that was pristine. The colors were vivid. It looked like something that could have been made last year in terms of the quality of what I was seeing. No colors faded. And I guess that's because they recently did a Blu-ray. Paul, you saw it on Blu-ray?
Yeah, but I also have a DVD from a few years before, so it'd be interesting to compare to see how much better it is on that Blu-ray. But
DJ, how did you see it?
I saw a digital copy, which I think is one of the restored versions. So, but I did watch some bonus material showing the comparisons between the original and the new, because I think it was recently an anniversary, and that's one of the reasons why they did the restoration was for this new copy that Paul was talking about.
Okay, so there was a restoration. Well, it showed. I mean, I was stunned by the quality of the print. Any other notes? Anything fascinating? There's so much. This movie was weird. Ultimately, I liked it. I really did, and I thought it was inventive and very, very strange.
Did we talk about the fact that they had to change the name of the record company?
Oh yeah. So I knew nothing about this, but there's a scene where it's a press conference. The Swan has landed, and the press crowd around, and it's very brief. But I noticed that very sloppily they've superimposed something over the name of Swan's group, and I said, "What the hell's that all about?" And it turns out that does anybody else remember the specifics? But
It was,
yeah. Go ahead.
It was originally the record company was called Swan Song, and later it was called Death Records. But
and this was a real life thing.
Well, around the same time, Led Zeppelin were using it. I think it was Led Zeppelin, and they kind of sort of forced them to sort of change it.
Yeah, they said, "Hey, that's a real name." Do you remember? Anybody remember what it's called? I can't remember.
Well, it's the Swan Song Records is what Paul's saying was Led Zeppelin's copyright.
Yeah. What did they change it to?
I don't think they changed it. It was just one of their divisions of a greater label, so it wasn't often used.
But in the movie, what was Brian De Palma forced to change the name to?
Well, it was called Death Records. The bird on its back. That was
okay, the bird on its back. Yeah. Okay, yeah. That's I saw that and I just said, what's that all about? It's such a terrible little tiny special effect they used. It's like,
because there's the two, like, because you've got the bird on its back, which goes with Death Records, but then you still see, even though you don't see the word Swan Song, you still see lots of Swan logos. But then that, I suppose, without the words, that still fits with Swan, and there's nothing they can do to make them change a logo which doesn't have any words on it.
Yeah.
Well, it almost makes you feel like if you've ever worked at any company that's been involved in a corporate setting, that they got bought out. So even though realistically they had to change it due to copyright, it felt like, oh, well, this is a little division of something bigger, and that's who bought them out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, ultimately, I recommend the movie. It's a enormous curiosity. If you're a Brian De Palma fan, you're certainly going to be interested in seeing it. And if you're interested in the music scene of the time, it just seems like you're going to want to see this. There's a lot of reasons to see this. What do you guys say? Recommend it?
Oh yes, and thank you to my friend Nick for introducing it to me originally.
You know, I enjoyed this film, and I can't say that I've seen many De Palma films, although until I started this collaboration with my dear nerd brother Toppy here, I can't say that I was paying attention who the directors of films were as much as the cast, but it certainly makes me want to seek out more Brian De Palma films, because in a moment I'll talk about related things that I'd recommend, and there is a De Palma film there. So if everyone is ready, this is a part of the show we like to call our snack tray. So if you enjoyed The Phantom of the Paradise, the recommendation from our friend Mr. Paul Chandler of The Shy Life, there's some other things you might enjoy watching, and I'll go first on that. I've got a couple of recommendations here. So in the same vein of Phantom of the Paradise, since this really was a mashup of several different legendary stories, one including Phantom of the Opera, which I would recommend the 2004 Phantom of the Opera theatrical release. And this was actually quite a delightful movie because while it incorporated elements of the original Phantom story with the man who was paying for the diva's singing lessons, it also gives you a little history of the theater, because there's an auction that takes place, and it's gorgeous because the beginning of the film is in black and white. It gives you a taste of the days gone by. And as the chandelier in the opera house is being raised, the dust is disappearing, and they colorize the scene into these beautiful crimson reds and these Tuscan colors of candlelight. So the opera house comes to life as the chandelier that fell during Phantom of the Opera rises to the ceiling. So the 2004 Phantom of the Opera, I'd recommend, stars Gerard Butler, Emmy Rossum, and also Mini Driver, which many of you may be more familiar with. And my second recommendation.
DJ, I got to ask, was that 2004? Was that a movie version of Andrew Lloyd Webber's Phantom?
I do believe so, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so unlike the original Phantom story, which the earliest version was a black and white film that involved a photographer, and that's how he's disfigured is through a developing accident in the dark room. This Phantom of the Opera has some elements of that. They do explain an accident that disfigures the fan of the diva, but that 2004. And also, I'm going to recommend a film from 2000, which happens to be a Brian De Palma film. And it's a film that I actually enjoyed long before I learned of Phantom of the Paradise. This is a film called Mission to Mars, and it stars Gary Sinise, who, of course, most notably was in Forrest Gump as Lieutenant Dan, as well as Jerry O'Connell, who we talked about as being born in 74. And, he is known for being in that Sliders show on Fox. And he's going to be doing a voice on the new Star Trek Below Decks cartoon coming out soon. And it also has Don Cheadle, who was in some of those Oceans movies that had George Clooney in them.
Yeah, the Ocean 11 movie.
Yeah, and the ones that followed, a couple of them. So Mission to Mars from 2000, which was a Brian De Palma film, thoroughly enjoyable.
I'm just curious, your selection of Mission to Mars, was there anything other than the fact that it was directed by De Palma? Is that you're connecting it to Phantom of the Paradise?
No, it's another De Palma film that I'm recommending.
Okay, all right. Paul, what does this Phantom of the Paradise make you think of and want to toss out there?
Yeah, I recommend two films. I think we've mentioned both of them just in passing. I would recommend I think it's 1973 Wicker Man, because that's if you can go with Phantom of the Paradise, then the original Wicker Man is also almost a musical in many ways, and also a horror film. Doesn't have the campy humor, but it's still.
Yeah, no camp in Wicker Man. And by the way, we're not talking about that recent remake. We're talking about the original.
No.
Yeah.
And my other recommendation would be Suspiria, not only for Jessica Harper, but the Dario Argento is very interested in colors and how a film looks, and that sort of shares a similarity with Phantom of the Paradise. They definitely have a very unique, vivid color style, and again, Suspiria is a very good sort of horror film, Italian horror film, but it is in English language.
So I guess I'd toss out there, well, one of the closest things I can think of that's related to Phantom of the Paradise is Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Yay!
It's really something how closely they're related. The other thing, I certainly, since one of the things Phantom of the Paradise tries to parody isn't the right word. Reference, I guess, maybe is a better word, is Phantom of the Opera. The movie that I can think of that closely resembles what De Palma was doing there, even to the point of a movie filming a stage production, is Claude Rains' Phantom of the Opera from the 40s, I think, which was a color movie. And, what happens to Phantom of the Opera, his decline into madness, is, really where the Phantom of the Paradise's decline in his madness, it's kind of the same story. Otherwise, De Palma wise, you want to see more split screen? Look at Carrie, which also does a lot with color. De Palma does, De Palma loves red. What can I say? Carrie has a lot of red in it. The only other thing, the camp quality, God, I mean, I think it owes something that's to Batman. I'm not sure. Willy Wonka. There's the surreal, campy qualities make me think of those things. But frankly, Phantom of the Paradise is one of a kind. Weird.
Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and tease our next episode, and I'll read the little synopsis that we're doing. Ironically, Paul, Toppy hit the nail right on the head because our next episode that we're gonna release after this is gonna be our first show of April, and I'm doing a themed episode. It's going to be an Easter episode, and we're going to do the Gene Wilder Willy Wonka from '71.
Yes.
So, I will go ahead and play the gumball and all that stuff, and just give me a minute or two here, and then we'll come back to you, and you can say goodbyes and tell everyone where to find you here. So here's the thing. Alrighty, folks. Well, now is the time where we give you a little tease of what's to come. Bring me that bag of coins there the magician left behind, Toppy.
Oh, I got it right here. That magician from vaudeville left these magic coins. Here you go.
Okay, so go ahead and hand me that capsule there,
Here
sir.
you go. There. What is our next selection, DJ? What's in that capsule?
Okay, well, this is a film from '71, and this is going to be an Easter special. It's going to be on Friday, April 6th, here on Univaz. A poor but hopeful boy seeks one of the 5 coveted golden tickets, and I think you know what I'm talking about. This is a movie that stars Gene Wilder in the lead role of Willy Wonka. And of course, we've got Jack Albertson and Peter Ostrom, and just a laundry list of talents. And Easter's all about candy, of course, so it's one of my favorite days of the year. Next time on Matinee Minutia, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Because I got a golden ticket, it's a golden day.
All right, looking forward to that. I recently, before I knew we were doing this movie, just suddenly needed to see Willy Wonka, the Gene Wilder version, and right after it, I said, "Well, now I want to see Who's Its Face in the newer version." Who do I mean by Who's Its Face? What's his name?
Johnny Depp.
Yeah, Johnny Depp.
Alrighty, folks. Well, Paul, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh.
And
thank
you. You're quite welcome. And let the fine folks at home know where they can find you on the interwebs.
Well, I have my own show, which the Shy Life podcast, and I hope we can keep our date for. If you remember last summer, we did a special Shy Life podcast episode celebrating the first season of Matinee Minutia, and I'm hoping you'll keep the date again for when you get to the end of this season, and we'll meet up again and have a big chat about your second season.
Ooh, sounds good to me, right, DJ?
Yeah, I know if you strike the punch, Gertie will be there.
Yeah. And I'm also on Around the Archives, which is a podcast about more British TV, sort of obscure TV, and I have a blog, shayeti.com. But those are the the main locations.
Very good.
Excellent. It was a pleasure having you, sir. And
Thank you.
my dear sweet nerd brother, Toppy, would you do us the honors of saying good night, Gracie?
Well, good night, Gracie.
Thank you for listening to Matinee Minutia. Our show streams live on the first and third Friday of the month.
Go to univazpods.net, click the tower for audio, enter Discord for chat.
You can find our show anywhere you listen to podcasts. Visit our webpage at matineeminutia.com.
Tweet us on Twitter at Matinee Minutia. Find our group on Facebook.
Have an idea for a show? Or let us know how we're doing.
Email us at matineeminutia@gmail.com. Phew.
I have a voice.
I have a voice.
You have a voice.
You have a voice.
We have a voice.
We have a voice.
Unique voices in podcasting.
univazpods.net. Okay, I'm going to end the recording, and we'll still be here betwixt ourselves.